The Saiga wandered across the pale steppe, her wide nostrils working steadily as she moved through the brittle winter grasses. The land stretched endlessly in soft yellow-grey waves, dotted only by the dark silhouettes of shrubs and the faint shimmer of distant mirages. This was open country, vast, cold and thin-aired. The steppe wind usually cut across her flanks, carrying scents far and wide, helping her place predators, fresh shoots, old trails. But today the air felt heavy, too heavy. She lifted her narrow head, nostrils flaring with effort. Breathing took more strength than it should have, not because the air was too thin, but because it wasn't thinning at all. On the high plateaus, the air was meant to be light, crisp, sharp in her lungs. Instead, every breath felt as dense as the lowlands. She continued forward, her strange swollen nose, built by evolution to warm freezing air and filter dust, fluttering with confusion. The air was oddly warm inside her nostrils. The resistance stopped her rhythm mid-stride. She snorted sharply and shook her head. The steppe wind blew across her coat, but the gust lacked altitude's familiar dryness. It felt full, heavy, as though carrying weight. That was wrong. She walked deeper into the steppe, scanning the horizon. A small herd of other Saiga grazed several hundred meters away. They lifted their heads more often than usual, ears twitching at nothing. A few took deeper breaths, too deep, trying to clear a sensation that wouldn't clear. The Saiga lowered her head to feed. Even the grasses smelled muted, as if fewer volatile scents were carried by the air. A black kite swooped overhead. Usually, birds soared gracefully here, riding updrafts and sweeping across the plateau without effort. But this kite struggled, wings beating more than gliding. Its flight line wavered, it dipped unexpectedly low, struggled upward, then circled with far more flapping than necessary. It looked like a bird flying in air too dense for easy lift. The Saiga watched it circle once, twice, then land abruptly on a hilltop, something black kites almost never did during daylight when thermals should have been strong. She took another breath. Heavy. Full. Wrong. She moved on, her long legs carrying her across cracked soil where cold wind normally swept with ease. But even the wind felt slowed. It pushed against her like a thick, warm wave. A Corsac fox trotted across the grassline, stopping to sniff the air. Its chest expanded sharply with each inhale. It looked confused. At one point it coughed, shook its body, and tried again. The fox squinted into the horizon, unable to rely on distant scents. Too much air pressure crushed signals. The Saiga approached the fox's path and they crossed without fear, predator and prey equally distracted by the changed world. Far ahead, human figures stood near a weather station, metal towers rising over the grasses. Researchers moved between instruments, checking screens, adjusting sensors, pacing with unusual urgency. Barometric pressure is way above normal for this elevation, one said, staring at the monitor. Broken instrument. All 5 stations report the same readings. That's impossible. Pressure shouldn't behave like this. Saiga respiration rates are up by nearly 30%. They're struggling. The Saiga didn't understand their words, but she recognized tension in their voices. Sharp, clipped, uneasy. Humans only sounded like that when something fundamental in the environment was wrong. She continued forward, lifting her head every few steps as the weight of the air pressed against her sensitive nose structures. Her lungs worked harder. She wasn't built for dense air. Saiga antelope were adapted for high, thin steppe winds, for cold, fast-running air. Her whole body felt out of place. The grasses around her failed to sway fully even when broad gusts came. Their tips bent sluggishly, slow to return to upright positions. Dust lifted only a meter before settling prematurely. Even the insects behaved differently. Flies hung low, unable to hover at proper heights. A distant boom echoed over the steppe, just a sound of shifting ice on a far ridge. Normally such noises carried sharply in thin air. Today the echo warped, dull and muffled. Everything in the steppe relied on the breath of the land, its thinness, its mobility, its clarity. Without thin air, birds couldn't glide, scents wouldn't travel, predators couldn't scout effectively, prey couldn't detect threats, grasses spread fewer seeds, thermals collapsed, altering flight patterns, clouds held lower, forming strange layers, temperature regulation fractured, Saiga migratory patterns broke down. The Saiga stopped beside a shallow depression. She inhaled once, twice, lungs working harder than they should. Her ears rotated toward every faint rustle. Too many rustles, too close, because sounds didn't travel far either. The world felt compressed. She stepped onto a rise overlooking the plain. The entire steppe stretched outward, pale and vast, but the air above it hung too heavily, like a sky that had forgotten its altitude. She lifted her head again and inhaled deeply. The air pushed back. She snorted, pawed the ground, shook her head in frustration. The world had thickened. The atmosphere refused to lighten. Her instincts fought conditions that didn't match memory. The Saiga looked across her homeland, open, endless, suffocating in its unfamiliar weight, and as she wandered on through grasses that bent too slowly in winds that moved too heavily, she understood the quiet, disquieting truth. The air wouldn't thin. By the next morning, the Saiga felt the heaviness before she opened her eyes. She lay curled in a shallow hollow among stiff grasses, her breath loud in her chest, louder than she remembered from any other winter dawn. Saiga were built for endurance, lungs wide, nasal passages enormous to warm and filter thin air. But the breath that filled her now pressed back as if she were inhaling water instead of wind. She rose slowly, legs trembling not from weakness but from the strange drag in the atmosphere. Her first step felt weighted, her second no lighter. The air refused to thin. She approached a patch of frozen earth, cracked in a mosaic of pale white lines. Ground frost normally lingered here until midday, but today the frost softened too fast, held heat too long, behaved in ways that did not match the climate her species knew for thousands of years. A crow swooped low overhead, wings pumping hard. It attempted to glide, failed, flapped again with an awkward jerk. The Saiga lifted her muzzle. The crow circled once, fighting the viscosity of the sky, then landed clumsily on a shrub. Its feathers puffed outward as it panted lightly, catching its breath. Birds of the steppe were masters of distance flight, designed to move with the wind, not push against something that felt like invisible water. The Saiga exhaled slowly. She walked toward a river cut into the plain. Normally she would smell moisture, hear the crisp echo of water moving through open land. But today the sound was strange, muffled, pressed downward as if sound waves sagged in the dense air. When she reached the bank, she dipped her muzzle to drink. Water tasted normal. Air did not. A gust of wind rolled over the steppe. She braced instinctively. Winds here could be fierce, slicing across the land and pushing everything sideways. But this gust felt unnatural. It pushed slow and heavy, like a thick wave. The grasses bent reluctantly. Dust failed to lift. Even the wind was suffocating. Across the river, she saw a herd of Saiga moving slowly, far slower than usual. Their legs carried them stiffly, heads low, nostrils flaring. The smallest calf struggled to keep pace. Its breaths were shallow, panicked. A female nudged it forward, her own breathing loud and rhythmic. Their adaptation, specialized nasal turbinates evolved precisely to function in thin air, now worked against them, overheating in dense air that gave too much resistance. The Saiga watched the calf collapse to its knees. It stood again, wobbling. Took 3 steps. Collapsed once more. Its mother circled it anxiously. The herd slowed but did not stop. Predators hunted weakness. The Saiga moved on, uneasy. She climbed a low ridge where wind typically ripped across with velocity strong enough to reveal predators miles away. Today, the ridge felt dead. The air barely moved. The view was clear, but the pressure distorted distance. Sense failed to travel, her senses fought confusion. Below her, a steppe eagle soared, tried to soar, but lost lift after only a few seconds. It flapped downward, landed abruptly on a rock, and stood there, wings open, confused. Its feathers did not ruffle properly. Even its call sounded wrong, muted, compressed as if trapped near the ground. The Saiga turned her head as a rustle drifted through the grasses. A wolf appeared on the ridge opposite her. Its nose twitched frantically. Its ears spun, trying to catch distant vibrations that weren't carrying. The wolf began trotting downhill, not toward prey, but toward wind. It needed information, but the air offered none. Predators were becoming blind. The Saiga stepped backward instinctively, but the wolf did not see her. Not until it was far closer than it should have ever approached unnoticed. Only then did it freeze, too surprised to attack. They stared at one another, two animals equally betrayed by the air. The wolf backed away, confused, and disappeared into a shallow ravine. The Saiga exhaled again, breath shaking. She moved toward a cluster of shrubs, where a pair of ground squirrels should be chittering. But today they emerged sluggishly, blinking as if waking from deep sleep. Their tiny chests expanded rapidly. Dense air overloaded their breathing. They scrambled weakly back to their burrows, unable to maintain their usual frantic pace. Further along the ridge, she found a man-made post stacked with instruments, thermometers, anemometers, pressure sensors. Two humans sat on folding stools, voices raised in disbelief. "Pressure is rising again," one said, pressing a palm to her forehead. "That makes no sense. This region has one of the lowest baseline pressures on the continent. Altitude hasn't changed, but something is trapping air here, or forcing more of it downward. Wildlife respiration is spiking. Birds can't glide. Even wolves are struggling to track scent. We might be looking at a microclimate collapse." They spoke faster now, worry in their cadence. "If this continues," one whispered, "Saiga migration routes will fail entirely." The Saiga couldn't interpret their analysis, but she sensed urgency, a tension that vibrated through their bodies the same way predators trembled before storms. She approached the far side of the ridge, where the steppe stretched endlessly pale. Normally, heat waves shimmered low. Today, there was no shimmer. Dense air pinned everything down. She lifted her head. Breathing grew harder as she gained elevation. That was expected. What wasn't expected, what was terrifying, was that the air became no lighter, no easier to draw, no thinner as she climbed. Her lungs expanded deeply, but the breath offered no relief. The air held her like a hand around her chest. She kept climbing anyway, driven by instinct. Saiga always sought thinner air when stressed, but the elevation offered no escape. She reached a plateau where the wind should have been sharp and cutting, wind that tasted like distance and sky. Instead, it sagged over her like a blanket. She stood there for a long time, alone, breathing heavily as the dense atmosphere pressed close. Too close. A vulture soared overhead, or tried to. It flapped harder, then dropped to land heavily on a carcass. Even scavengers were being grounded. Clouds above thickened in the pressed-down sky. Normally they would thin and disperse at this altitude. Instead they squatted low, bloated with moisture they didn't release. Pressure swelled. She turned slowly, scanning the landscape that had raised her. Grasses bending in slow motion, birds grounded or flying erratically, predators misjudging distance, prey unable to outrun anything, sound compressed, scent trapped, respiration strained, migration paths broken. Everything depended on thin air. Everything. And now the sky refused to rise. The Saiga stepped forward through the pale steppe grasses. Each step felt heavier, each breath harder. The world had thickened around her. She exhaled once, deeply. The air stayed stubbornly dense, as if the entire atmosphere had descended onto the steppe and refused to lift again. For the first time, she understood the most frightening truth. The thickened sky was not temporary. The air wouldn't thin.